No, Surinder, you have to give me the thumbs up.
Yeah.
Right, everybody. Thursday, 5 o'clock. And guess what time? It must be time for the property professionals. Lovely sunny day out there. Quite sunny inside as well, I think. Anyway, let's get on with it. Let's talk about property today. We've got a really special guest coming on shortly. Before that, don't tell Ekil this. He's skived off, actually. But Mithish is laughing. He's stopped Mithish in. So, yeah, Mithish has had to cover for him. He's probably, I'm not even going to say, we all know what he's up to. He's probably pretending he's working somewhere in some, retreat, as he always does. But Mithish, welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thank
you're
you.
you're the man with the money today.
I am, yes. I'm the man with the bad news, I think.
Oh dear. Right. Well, in that case, I'll be quiet. So I'll, as I say every week, put down your colouring pencils, get your writing pens out. Let's have the bad news, mate. That's not a good thing. So give us a quick introduction and the bad news, and then lead us onto the bad news. Let's get on with it.
Okay, so I'm Mithish Manik. I'm representing Akil from Our Mortgage Broker. So we're a team of 8 advisors based in Bracknell. We specialize in all types of finances, from your normal standard residential mortgages to buy-to-lets to development finance to commercial mortgages, including bridging. So I've got a presentation that I can present with you all, but the reason why I said that I have some bad news is because the Bank of England base rate's gone up by another 0.25%. So we're expecting, obviously, rates to probably go up sooner rather than later.
So I know what you're going to ask me next. Let me. You know what? Doing a couple of years on this on Zoom gives you psychic abilities. I bet you're going to ask me, can I share slides? Yeah. So,
Yeah, that'll be really good. Otherwise, it'll be a very
Right.
boring 10-minute presentation.
Surinder, can you? Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's great. Surinder,
That's done.
can we put the 50p's in?
They're already done.
All right. So have a go, Mithish. See if Surinder's let you into the club of being able to share slides.
Okay. I'm not sure. Can you see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay.
You've got to press the green button, the one that matches your shirt.
Okay, 1 second. Can you see my slides now?
You can now. Yep. Well done. I think we're going to give you a house point for that.
Perfect. So obviously the first slide is just talking about our new branded logo. If obviously been attending these sessions before, then you'd have noticed that. It's my direct mobile number, my email contact, and our website. So you can see the lovely photos of all the advisors, including the new ones that recently joined the last 6 months. So let's get on with it. So let's start off with the market update, because always good to understand kind of what's happening there. So house prices have increased by 0.8% in January, making this the strongest start to the year since 2006. This pushed annual house price growth up to 11.2%, with 1 in 4 local authorities recording double-digit growth, according to Nationwide. We're expecting elevated activity levels and positive price growth in the market to continue over the next few months. In terms of demand for housing, that's strengthened as we enter the new year, up 49% in the 4 weeks to mid-January compared to the same period from 2018-21, according to Zoopla. Buyer demand has increased for all property types. That includes London flats, which has seen reduced demand as workers return to the capital, which is obviously quite normal based on today's times. However, having said that, London has seen the strongest rental growth more recently, with 6.2% growth over the 3 months to November. The central London boroughs of Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea and Islington have seen the greatest rent rises over the same 3-month period at 9.5%, 7.7% and 7.4% respectively. So rental demand's there definitely within London. In terms of the EPC requirements, I'm sure Akhil's mentioned this a lot. We've had a lot of changes in lenders bringing in new products or reduced rates depending on the type of EPC range you have. So this is kind of what's changed. So currently domestic private rental properties must meet a minimum level of energy efficiency, which is an EPC rating of E. So anything above E would have issues, especially for mortgage lending. However, beginning of 2025, all newly rented properties will be required to have a certification rating of C or above. Existing tenancies will have until 2028 to comply. So this is quite important for landlords out there. If you have a property with the energy efficiency or rating of A to C, then obviously you get preferential mortgage rates with many lenders. So I thought I'll create a new slide in terms of kind of the general trends I'm seeing recently, especially with the last probably 5 inquiries I've had, and it's probably to do with this area. So I thought let me just expand on this. So what is a let to buy mortgage and what are the options? So the first bit that I've mentioned here is consent to let and move in with family. It's an unusual scenario, but you could have scenarios where clients are saying, look, I'm going to let out my property, I'm going to get more rent, and I might be thinking of buying a property later on. I've got less deposit. I'll increase my deposit while I've got less cost if I move in with my sister, my parents. So that's an option. And basically what will happen is you then change your residential mortgage and maybe have a consent to let, which means you'd have to take permission from the existing lender to be able to do that and then get tenants in. And then if you're, let's say, tied into that deal, then you may want to wait until that deal expires and then change that to a normal buy-to-let mortgage. The next scenario is a let-to-buy mortgage and an onward residential mortgage, which means you're then saying, I'm moving out of my property, I want to let it out, and then get another residential mortgage for my new residential purchase. So you'll have 2 mortgages basically in a nutshell, but you'll have simultaneous completion. So both mortgages will complete at the same time. So you move out and move into your onward residential property. The third scenario is consent to let and then just onward residential mortgage. That means what you're saying is, I don't need the extra cash to buy for the deposit for the onward residential purchase. I have enough. So I use my own deposit, get a normal standard residential mortgage, but then you need permission. Our lenders will need to see that consent to let permission from the existing lender. So you'd have to obviously contact your existing lender for that, because obviously at that point you'd have a residential mortgage. The last scenario is let to buy mortgage and onward cash purchase, which can happen, which means you're saying, I want to release cash on my existing residential property, there's lots of equity in there, let's do that, change that to a let to buy mortgage, raise extra cash, the cash is enough, I've got an extra 150k on top, and then I'll buy the onward property to move into as my main residence as a cash purchase. So these are the scenarios that we've come across. In terms of rates, so nothing's really changed in terms of, I think the last time that Akhil looked at this. However, I'm pretty sure it will change from next week. So HMO buy-to-let mortgage rates right now as low as 2.49 if it's under a limited company name, up to 75% loan to value. Obviously all those other fees involved like product fees and valuation fees as well. Buy-to-let rates in personal names starting from 1.19, so still pretty cheap right now on a 2-year fixed rate, 35% loan to value. Buy-to-let rates on limited company starting for 2.49, 2-year fixed rates, 75% loan to value. The other interesting rates are your residential rates, up to 95% loan to value. You go still picking up deals at 2.39, which is really, really cheap. If you compare that to, let's say, when last year, rates are very, very high. The main residential mortgage at 60% loan to value, starting for 1.25 on a 2-year fixed rate. I'll leave you finally with my details. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And you can obviously follow us on all the social media platforms that are there. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, God, sorry, muted myself. You said you had some bad news. What do you reckon? How bad is it going to get?
You see, well, the way I'm looking at this is that if you logically think about people right now that are desperately looking to move because they've decided not to move because of the lockdown issues, and they're thinking, we'll save up and then we'll look at it next year. Unfortunately, those clients will probably end up having higher mortgage rates compared to in the last, let's say, 3 months or so, because the rates are actually going up. So now, if you think about if you're going to do a let to buy scenario, you're going to end up having a slightly higher rate on the let to buy and also the residential. So that's the reason why I said that. And obviously, rates going up from 0.5% to 0.75 means that you'll definitely see that. And coupled with that, you've seen obviously your estimated gas, electricity bills go up as well. Mine's gone up significantly. So cost of living generally is going up.
So does that mean property prices could, let's use the word soften, because nobody likes it going down, right?
I mean, you see, it's all about demand and supply as far as I can tell. So outside London, prices are going up. Again, types of properties. So you're looking at somebody saying to you, "I've got a 4-bed." Then you can change a study to an extra bed or whatever. Clients would love that because they may be sort of working 1 or 2 days from home, a family with 2 kids, probably don't want to buy it somewhere outside London, let's say in Surrey. They would love to sort of go for that type of property now if they're living in a 3-bedroom property. So the issue you have is that demand's very high, and then you have a garden and all that with it, nearby schools. And that's what we're seeing is that certain areas, especially the type of properties, demands are very high, and so people are paying a bit over the odds as well. I've seen some cases where clients are saying, I know it's 10-15 grand higher, but I'll just pay the full asking price.
Wow. All right. So I'm going to have to get you back on because I want to know what those areas are. And I think a lot of our viewers want to know where the areas you can get away with a bit more negotiation, shall we say.
I think sometimes also you find that property purchase transactions fall through, which maybe they've been sort of ongoing for a while.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're in a scenario like I've mentioned, where you've done a let to buy and then you've released cash from a property and then you technically become a cash buyer.
Yeah.
Estate agents probably like that because then they're thinking it's not too much hassle. You can plan the process ahead because all you need is you provide the address to the lender that this is the place you're buying. Start the process very early. Within 2 weeks, offers out, balls rolling. Within 3, if it's a freehold asset, less than 4 weeks, one is drawn down. So it can be pretty quick. And so if you've got your own cash on top, then the estate agent probably would like that because they're thinking this is a 4 to 5 week completion for us.
Really interesting idea. So look, I'm going to have to tie you up now, tie you down. So contact Surinder, come back, do a program especially on that. We're going to have you. Don't tell Akhil this. He's just going to go nuts. We're going to give you your own program. I want you to explain that out to our viewers because that's got me really interested. Where you become what's the term you do? Let to buy. Yeah. Become a cash buyer.
Yeah.
Get the house you want.
Yeah.
And everybody's happy apart from the guys who just.
Yeah. You can create my own YouTube channel. I don't mind. Whatever works.
Well, you use us. We're here for you. We've done the hard work. Use us. We're going to have a share. So thank you for that. Yeah. No, brilliant. So yeah, book it with Surinder. Go on. You were about to say something?
Yeah, I was about to say that I've done a couple of videos recently with Akhil on our. So you can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and the last one especially has gone into a lot of detail on this aspect of let to buys. But I've covered a lot of ground. Even simple things like buying a piece of land and what can be done with it. So I would suggest maybe try and look at those as like half an hour videos.
Yeah. Look, come back. I'm going to ask you more questions than you have on your video, right? You know what I'm like. So we'll do one for our viewers especially, and I'm gonna watch those, sure. And I'm gonna ask you extra questions. So be ready. Make sure you do your homework.
No problem at all.
All right. Well done. We'll give you 5 stars for this presentation.
Thank you very much. I'll let Akim know.
Well, yeah, don't tell him. He might send you in permanently. Then one less thing for him to do. But anyway, look, thank you for your time. Really, really great chat.
Thank you.
Right, and I guess it's just sort of he popped up on my screen. I wish he hadn't, because I was trying to surprise everyone. But I think he's a man that needs no introduction. So listen, if you've still got your coloring pencils out, put them down. Get your really good writing pens out, because this guy's going to give you some magic notes. He's been here before. We try and get him as much as possible. He's literally the man with more letters after his name than the Russian alphabet. So I don't think he needs an introduction, but I'm sure he'll go through some of his qualifications. I'm going to welcome Arif Panjani. Arif, over to you, and I know what you're going to ask me.
Dil, thank you very, very much. It's been a long time seeing you, rather. I'm not seeing you personally, but yeah, it's been a long time. Apology, I have not worn my turban today, but at least I'm trying to match with some of the ethnicity that we all share together. So thank you very much for a warm welcome. If you could allow me to share the screen, if I may.
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's like, you get this, what do I call it, psychic ability. But listen, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to get my writing pen now. I'm going to take careful notes. I'm going to try and be quiet and listen to you very, very carefully. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very, very much. And it's always a pleasure to be part of the Property Professionals speaking slot. And thanks again, as usual, to give me a slot today. Today, we shall be discussing on to how to avoid inheritance tax. And we would be going literally rather very basic tools as to a baby steps of why inheritance tax within the property sector, why us, and why we need to be more aware of the rather more death tax, which is, there are only 2 certainties of life, really, death and taxes, but why we need to be more aware within the property sector of the inheritance tax than any other tax for that matter. Now, before we go on to it, just would like to start up with a simple example of, say, for example, I start buying and selling a pen. If I were to buy a pen worth, say, £2, I wouldn't be paying any tax to buy a pen at the outset. But that's not the case with the property. As we all know, there's something called stamp duty, land tax. That's kind of an entry charge. We have not even made any money out of it, but just to buy a commodity called property, we need to pay a tax on it. But what goes worse is that to come out of it as an exit cost as well, there's an inheritance tax. So going back to the same example of this £2 pen, if I were to sell it for £5, made a gain of £3, I would just pay a £3 gain tax on it. And then if I were to have this particular business of a multimillionaire and then become a business worth 10 million, this business can pass over to my generation without paying any tax whatsoever. There's something called business property relief, which you would have the complete 0% inheritance tax if it were to be a trading business. Now, if I were to replace the same pen with any other commodity but a property, then all of a sudden, the inheritance tax of business property relief is no longer applicable. That means if the same business were to be a property business, the 10 million would be subject to 40% inheritance tax, which is 4 million. And hence the reason is very, very crucial for the property entrepreneurs, investors, developers, and landlords to be more aware and savvy around the inheritance tax than any other industry. Now, before we uncover the inheritance tax and look at the ways and venues of how to mitigate that, let me tell you something about myself for those of you who don't know as to why am I talking the inheritance tax, what authority do I have, and why on the property sector. My name is Arif Panjani. I'm one of the partner of an award-winning firm of chartered accountants. We've got 2 offices based in Wembley and King's Cross. And in addition to holding a double bachelor's degree, yes, I've got about 5 professional qualification membership, starting with ACCA, ICAW, CIFA, ATT, STEP, and CTA. So I don't think as far as the accounting or tax bodies are concerned within the UK, I've left out on any. So when it comes to property taxation, I kind of know what I'm talking. But above all, and more importantly, I'm also a property investor and landlord. So I go through with the pains and agony a typical entrepreneur within the property industry would go through with. And today's presentation is purely aiming at those entrepreneurs within the property sector who have built up their portfolio, but they are not aware or perhaps not have done anything regarding the inheritance tax. So let's start on with the inheritance tax, why it would affect us and what we can do about it. So what is an inheritance tax to start off with? Well, there are only two certainties of life, as we all know, death and taxes. But what if the tax were to come in the form of a death tax? How lethal it can be. So commonly it's a death tax, as it is known as. So it occurs when someone were to die and the estate were to be passed over to their beneficiaries. But before it were to go through the beneficiaries, a hefty chunk of 40% goes to the taxman or HMRC. So clearly it requires rather more important aspect of giving the attention to this particular tax than any other. So 40% inheritance tax, that's huge sum. But we have the impression of the fact that inheritance tax only occurs during the death of somebody, at the end of the life of someone. However, it can only also trigger during the lifetime if you were to create a trust. And there's something called 20% inheritance tax. But I'll not bombard you more with the complication of it. So that's in terms of inheritance tax. It usually occurs when someone dies. And why do we need to know the inheritance tax more of it? A typical UK property life cycle, we go through with at least 4 stages of taxes within the UK. If you were to buy a UK property, you buy the properties, you would pay the stamp duty land tax. You would have earned the income, you would have paid the income tax or corporation tax, depending on the tool you go through with. You would sell the property and then eventually end up paying capital gains tax, or rather you would keep it. And that's where the exit charge comes into play a role, which is rather more lethal. It's a 40% one, the inheritance tax. And that's what we are talking today, the last stage, 40% inheritance tax. Now, before I talk about the inheritance tax, as I've mentioned, there are various other taxes that a UK tax properties life cycle can typically go through with. But why inheritance tax need to give attention to? There's something called retail price index, a consumer price index, that needs to increase every year with the inflation rate. So national minimum wage rate back in 2019 were lower compared to what it is now, and it's going to be higher in the next year, and so on and so forth. So it has to match up to the economy in the inflation rate. So the threshold for the purpose of income tax back in 2009 was 6475. So up to that much of earning, you wouldn't have paid any tax, but anything more than that, you would start paying income tax on it. The same way, it has currently increased up to 12,570 to match up with the price index, to match up with the inflation rate. So now in the current year, up to 12,570 pound worth of earnings I can have without paying income tax. And usually it goes on every year. And look at the tax rate that I'm paying, about 20%, as long as I'm the basic taxpayer. So goes with other taxes such as national insurance, class 2, class 4. As you can see, there's a gradual increment in the thresholds, up to which point you don't pay any tax. Let's look at the inheritance tax. It was 325,000 pound back then, 2009-10. It is 325,000 pound till now, 2021. And look at the tax rate, 40%. And till date, why there is no hoo-ha around the inheritance tax is because HMRC knows very well to take something while the person is alive is quite difficult. Because the person will try and approach a tax advisor, try and mitigate the income tax, so on and so forth. However, if the person were to be not alive, my beneficiary would not get that pinch. It's not my hard-earned money. It's my parents or perhaps my other ascendants, those who have passed over the assets to me. And hence the reason HMRC becomes the second most, the inheritance tax rather becomes the second most revenue generation for HMRC as a cash cow after the PAYE, which is employment tax. Because if you were to hire me as an employee, and if I were to start working for you, and if you start paying me 20,000 pound salary, the amount of tax and national insurance that I would pay, I would have no control over it. Similar concept applies for the inheritance tax. The person who's paying now is no longer alive. He has no control over it. And the 40% chunk is thank you very much for the HMRC. Let's look at the case study as to what impact it had ever since 2009-10 till now by freezing the inheritance tax threshold looking at the example of a typical zone 1 and zone 4 property within the London. And we have not gone anywhere near South Kensington, Chelsea or Mayfair to go through with the higher price properties. So if you were to look at it, zone 1, the property, and these are the figures back in Zoopla, so you can check on the property addresses as well. 2009, this property was worth £730,000. Now it's worth 1.4 million. There's an increment of £634,000. As a result, if I were to have this property as of now, which is a buy-to-let property, the inheritance tax this property would pay before it gets passed over to my beneficiary would be over £500,000. And the result of freezing the inheritance tax threshold is as a result of additional £250,000 inheritance tax that I'm paying, having been the fact that at least the inheritance tax threshold would have increased to the level of inflation what we have currently, I would have at least saved by £250,000. So we are talking huge and big numbers for the purpose of inheritance tax. And less so, I think we have already obviously stressed as to why the inheritance tax and estate planning is so important around the property sector. But looking in terms of the facts wise and figure wise, why do I need to do inheritance tax planning? As I have mentioned, is 40% at least to start off with. It can go and it can vary up to different rates of 36 or 66%, but I would not go into the complexity of it now. It's a double taxation, and I would say it's a double taxation. Why would I say so? Is that if a person has accumulated their estate throughout their life, worth 2 million, 5 million, or 200 million for that matter, surely the person as a UK taxpayer would have paid something. So as a tax to HMRC prior to accumulating these estates anyway. So if I were to be an employee, I would have paid the income tax. If I were to be a businessman, I would have paid corporation tax, income tax, self-employment tax for that matter. So all of this that I have accumulated at my death is surely after paying some sort of tax. So on something which I have been left over after paying tax and to be further taxed on, surely it's double taxation. And that's the reason it's more lethal, because it applies at your death, not during your lifetime. So during your lifetime, you think, oh, I've got £10 million worth of estate, only to know it will only be passed over maximum 6 million to your beneficiaries. Yeah, threshold of £325,000 has been frozen. So that's bad news. That's really bad news. And that would remain the same for the next 2 to 3 years coming up to. There's something called residence nil rent ban that has been introduced that increases the threshold up to £500,000. However, the devil is always in the detail, and there are complex legislation attached to it to ensure that only those which ticks those boxes would be able to get the £500,000 nil rent ban. Otherwise, you would be still stuck to £325,000. As I've mentioned, for the residence nil rent ban side of it, and this is what HMRC targets: £5,000 estates to be bought into IST net every year. And look at the amount of revenue, cash count that inheritance tax is generating for HMRC: 46 billion over the period of next few years or so. We have all seen the property price increment even during the COVID-19 within the London vicinity of the London by the stamp duty land tax holiday. And it continues to rise so over the past 3 or 4 years, despite the COVID-19 depression or the recession that we have seen. Property industry, I would say, overall has not seen any steep decrease in terms of value. And alongside any other income tax planning, why inheritance tax is so different? Because they've attached something called a 7-year cycle. So if I were to own these 2 properties at the date as of now, and if I don't want to pay inheritance tax on this particular property, I would need to ensure that I were to gift it away and live 7 years from there on. So there's a 7-year cycle there. So if I were to gift it and not live for the next 7 years, it would still form part of my estate. So the traps that have been arranged to accumulate inheritance tax are quite hard. Unfortunately, no one likes to die and no one likes to talk about the debt. And that is the reason why, and HMRC knows it very well, the primary reason why inheritance tax becomes the most collective revenue, second most collective revenue for HMRC. Now, we have seen as to what inheritance tax can do, how lethal it can be. What can we do to legitimately reduce the inheritance tax for the purposes of our estate? We can make a will. Now, not many of us as of now, even attending this event would have done the will, but COVID-19 has clearly given us the indication of uncertainty towards human life. And apart from the uncertainty of human life, we all should have a will, purely because it comes up with a lot of inheritance tax advantages. How many of us did actually know that by simply drafting a will, and if you are a married couple, or if you have a partner, you can avoid inheritance tax in full on first death. I'm not saying completely, but on first death. So you can pass it over everything that you own to your spouse, and at least on the first death, there is no inheritance tax if one of the spouse were to die. And the reason being, the spouse is the exempt beneficiary for the purpose of inheritance tax, alongside the charity. So these are the only two exempt beneficiaries that if you were to give it to, you would not pay any inheritance tax whatsoever. Secondly, to ensure you can set up a trust. So you can set up a trust whereby you are gifting this particular property into a trust, live 7 years from there on, and that particular property would no longer be part of estate. You could be saying, why do I need to set up a trust? I can just give this property outrightly as well. You certainly can give this property outrightly. However, with trust comes some additional added advantages, which I'll explore it further. But the disadvantage of gifting this property outrightly is the fact that it triggers immediate capital gains tax if I were to gift it to my son or to anybody for that matter, any beneficiary for that matter. But if you were to gift it into trust, you can defer the capital gains tax. Not only that, you have the control on your gift. So tomorrow, if the World War III were to happen, and if you have lost everything that you had, God forbid, all you have is that particular property that you have gifted. You can dissolve the trust and take the property back. But that's not quite the case with the outright gifting. Once you have gifted, it's outside your control, the title deed has been transferred, and now the new owner is the owner of your property. The new owner could have sold the property, bought a Ferrari, gone for holiday, and your funds have gone. You wanted to benefit the new owner, but not on their terms, on your terms. And this is where the trust, the beauty of trust to come and play a role. So it's something like someone is an instrument where you put your trust into. You like the beneficiary, but you don't trust the beneficiary enough. And hence the reason you have created this trust. As I've mentioned, you can transfer assets. However, transferring assets between anybody other than the married couple or civil partners are subject to capital gains tax as well as inheritance tax, which is called potentially exempt transfer. But that's not quite the case with the spouses. So you can transfer any value of your estate to your spouse free of inheritance tax, and that would mitigate your inheritance tax completely. You can make gifts to a beneficiary, which are cash gifts. You can give them during your lifetime, and that will be again subject to 7-year cycle. And you can invest into some other IHT exempt investments. However, they come with their own risk. You need to do your own due diligence around it. Leaving it to charity, many have put within their will a significant amount of charitable donation. And what I would recommend here is that if you are keen on making a donation within your will, do up to 10% of your net estate. By you doing so, the inheritance tax gets reduced from 40% to 36%. You can also take a life insurance policy, and then that would go to a trust so that could pay off the IHT bills. There are certain insurance products as well around the IHT, but you need to really do your due diligence to ensure that the insurance that you have taken covers the entire inheritance tax liability exposure that you're exposed to. We'll go through with a small case study today and see what impact the pre and post inheritance tax could have. So a couple who owns one residential property where they live in and 2 buy-to-lets worth 350 each. The residential properties were 650 each. So if both were to die, God forbid, then the inheritance tax would be 700K times 40%, because the first residential property both jointly own covers up to the nil band, which I've told you earlier, which is 325,000. So combine that by 2, 650, that's fine. That would not be subject to inheritance tax. But anything in addition to it would subject to be inheritance tax inevitably. And look at the amount of inheritance tax on such a small estate, an estate worth 1.2, 1.3 million, which a typical Londoner with few properties, few buy-to-lets would easily have it. More than $250,000 goes into inheritance tax, 280,000. And post IHT planning, of course, you can transfer the property into trust, or you can transfer the property, or you can encase the property and gift it to your beneficiaries. You would end up paying no inheritance tax. Some of the basic inheritance tax planning which can be done and should be done. You really need to review your property portfolio to see what exposure you have to inheritance tax and how you could mitigate that too. I hope I have kind of justified the level of intensity inheritance tax do require, the attention it does require, and the action points that we need to take on to. And for this particular presentation itself, I have given lesser to the knowledge that I would give and more to the questions, so that if those of you who have questions, happy to take answers on. If you have specific inquiry regarding your inheritance tax or any other property related queries, feel free to scan the QR code, and then it would give you the chance of us evaluating your exposure to inheritance tax or any tax and come up with the tax planning measures. And as always, I'm pretty sure Dil would have questions on the inheritance tax or any other tax for that matter, and happy to answer it.
Yeah, thank you, Arif. This seems to be bad news Thursday today. I mean, Mitesh came up with bad news, and you've delivered some more bad news. But I guess we've got to lay it out for people. You know, it is bad news out there. Surinder, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to let you go first because I've got a few questions. Have you got any questions regarding the bad news Arif has just delivered us? Surinder, are you still there? Or you run out of 50p? I think he might have run out of 50p.
Yeah, he has run out. But
Right.
Inevitably, if you were to look at it within the property sector, in
Yep.
the last 5 to 6 years, the amount of changes that has occurred within the property sector is alarming. I mean, starting with Section 24, so income tax, you're paying more. Capital gains tax, look at it. If I were to sell this particular pen, I would pay 10% capital gains tax. But if the same commodity were to be not a pen, a residential property, I would pay 18%. A clear bias, or even 28% for that matter, if I'm a higher rate taxpayer. So on every occasion, HMRC is trying to collect more and more and more revenue within the property sector. Stamp duty, land tax, before 2016, there was no 3% additional surcharge. But now there is. The bottom line of the property entrepreneurs are sinking every year. They could be great on paper, but it comes to taking home, what to take home after paying the taxman is getting lesser and lesser.
So I'm going to pick up one of the points you did go through, and this is a interesting misunderstanding, but you went through it. I've got friends who've got property, and they believe they actually don't have a will, but they believe that everything automatically goes to the spouse. What? And I know you've got expertise in this area. What's the answer to that question?
So just in a nutshell, to answer that question, if you don't have a will, then you have died intestate. So in a layman's term, the country in which you live in, at least for this particular country for the matter, as a matter of fact, it allows you to give you an option, a choice that it's your estate, whether it's 2 property or 200 properties or whatever you have which forming part of estate. You decide, make up your will, you decide what will go to which one, which of your beneficiaries. If you have failed to do so, that means you have not drafted a will, or the will is not validly executed, then intestacy rules would be applicable. That means there's a whole chart depending on what the level of kith and kin that you have, whether you have a spouse. If you don't have a spouse, are you married? You're single. You have children. If you don't have children, then brothers. If you don't have brothers, your sisters, your parent. If you don't have parents, but it goes on and on and on. And depending on the relationship that you have, the percentage applicable, fixed kind of, as per the government legislation, would be distributed. And worst case scenario, if you don't have any kith and kin, it becomes a bona vacantia estate. That means you are giving your hard-earned estate to the crown for the services that you have insured. So there's an intestacy rules. There's a big chart. You can just Google it, or I'm more than happy to share it. And that is what is applicable. So for example, just to start off with, if you have a spouse The spouse would get the first £275,000 and your property, and 50% of your total estate in the interest in possession trust. Again, it's more complicated, but you have made it complicated by not drafting the will. Government is saying, we are giving you the option, you draft the will, it's your estate. If you fail to do so, it would be distributed as per our choice, as per our legislation.
So basically, if you had a will, couple with a will would pay zero tax. Couple without a will are going to end up paying some tax on the first death.
No, on the first death, yes, yeah. Because if you have a will, typically what couples would do, there's something called mirror will. So a husband would say everything goes to my wife, or wife would say everything goes to my husband. Since, as I've mentioned, there are only two exempt beneficiaries for the purpose of inheritance tax, either the spouse or the charity. So if you have 500 million dil, which I know you do, and if you give it to charity, then 500 million, there's no inheritance tax. Charity would not pay any inheritance tax because charity is an exempt beneficiary. Same goes for the spouse. Spouse is an exempt beneficiary. So on first death, say for example, husband were to die, or perhaps wife were to die, the second surviving spouse would get the entire estate free of inheritance tax. But it ends there. So if wife has died earlier, husband is alive, husband when were to die, it would be subject to inheritance tax.
Right, and the next question is, do you know any people?
Unless the spouse were to remarry, and there's a specific clause. There's a specific clause because, as you would know, within certain religion, you have the liberty of marrying up to 4 or maybe 15 for that matter. Within the legislation of the HMRC, the answer is no. So it's only one spouse applicable. So even if you were to remarry, the inheritance tax would be applicable there. They're very specific and precise in terms of the waiting time that they would wait for the collection of the revenue from your estate.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, do you know anybody who can help our viewers with a will?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we are a member of STEP, which is called a professional body called Society of Trust and Estate Practitioner. With that, we draft either the tax efficient will, which is inheritance tax efficient, or if you belong to a specific religion or faith, say for example Islamic will for that matter, or Jain will, the software would generate the will based on the legislation around that particular faith or belief. And it doesn't cost us, it doesn't go into thousands of pounds anyway. Typically a will drafting would be anything less than £200 to £300 at least to start off with, depending on how complex the matter is. But I'm yet to hear somebody has paid thousands of pounds just to draft a will. No, that's not the case.
Is it because they don't like talking about the inevitable, I'm guessing?
Indeed, yes, it is. Indeed, HMRC knows this very, very well, that nobody wants to talk about their death. And hence the reason they would not draft a will, to even start off with it, because they're thinking of drafting the will, now I have to die someday, one day, and as if they wouldn't have died otherwise. But yeah, it's a no-brainer, to be honest, to have a will. I mean, you can have a DIY will even done by yourself, which I would not recommend because it's an important piece of document. And given the fact that it doesn't cost us to draft a will professionally drafted, yeah, I mean, everyone should have a will. I mean, I've got a will for sure.
So just to make it absolutely clear, if you have a will, it does not mean you're going to die. Well, it doesn't mean you're going to die any sooner.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it acts as a reminder. So I have framed my will anyway. So, yeah, it reminds me of the fact that one day I would die. But yeah, it's a no-brainer to have your will drafted because you want to make sure that your assets, your estate would be distributed as per your will. You may want to give more to your spouse or less to your spouse and more to your one particular favorite son and so on and so forth. It's your estate, it's your property. You decide who would be benefited post your death, period.
Or you could leave it with people who create some great YouTube programs.
Indeed, yes, yeah. Indeed, yes. And provided those organizations are registered with the appropriate charitable commission of England and Wales, then yeah, I mean, sure, why not?
No comment on the charity registration. I think Srinder's found some 50 Bs. Srinder, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, the inheritance tax. Say a person dies today and his children inherit the property and the tax is due, when will that be payable?
So typically, the legislation states that when the person were to die, the inheritance tax forms needs to be filled up and paid within 6 months at the end of the death, end of the month of the death. So someone were to die on 1st of January, you have the month of January end and then 6 months post. So by 31st of July, those forms needs to be filled up and paid appropriate inheritance tax on it. That's 6 months timeline that the beneficiary has.
So what happens if there's not enough equity in that house?
Then eventually, it's a very good question, to be honest. And sorry, I need to give the credit to Surinder here on the level of question that he's asking.
I gave that question actually, though. Yeah.
So if someone were to have not sufficient equity, surely, say for example, someone were to have a property worth £1 million, that's all they have. They don't have any cash. The deceased did not have any cash, or maybe very little cash for that matter. Now, and on that £1 million property, 40% inheritance tax, £400,000, example, for the argument's sake. And I'm avoiding all the nil rate ban and so on. In that case, there are obviously two options. The option number one is to sell the property and pay off the inheritance tax. But you can't sell the property because the property was owned by the deceased. So unless the grant is issued, you cannot sell the property. But if you can't sell the property, you don't have the money, and then you can't get the grant. So it becomes a chicken and egg situation, vicious circle. And for that matter, HMRC has come up with the second solution of paying your inheritance tax over 10 yearly annual installments. Of course, they will charge you interest on it, but you can do the 10-year annual installment. So provided I have £40,000 as a beneficiary, I give it to HMRC and get the grant and get the property transferred to the beneficiary's name, and you don't have to sell the property then. You can pay your inheritance tax over the period of next coming 10 years. However, the moment you sell the property in the period of next coming 10 years, the entire inheritance tax liability becomes due, because the premise and the parameter based on which you've been given the installments is no longer applicable now. Your bricks and mortar has been converted into hard cash, gone into this pocket. So yeah.
Right. I have a even further question, is that a person has died, property $1 million, he's got a mortgage of 750, what is inheritance tax on now? Is it the equity, or is it the value?
So inheritance tax is on the person's estate as to what the deceased owned at the time of death. So if the property is worth 1 million and there's a mortgage of 750, that means up to £750,000 is a loan by that particular mortgage provider. The deceased owned only £250,000 at the time of death. Mm-hmm. So surely inheritance tax is only on the equity or anything for that matter which the deceased owned. Going back to the same pen prop example, if I were to buy this, if I were to have this pen worth £5, but there's a loan that I have taken just to buy this particular pen, which is worth £2, the equity is only 3. And the same goes. So what you own at the time of death, what the deceased had owned at the time of death, because £750,000 is owned by the bank.
Okay. Now, the thing is, if say a person has a property which he bought for £500,000, and this is now a sale, okay, but he has an equity in that of only 250. He's already borrowed more after purchasing it. So the tax, the CGT on that would be on the 500.
Yeah, right? For the purposes of CGT is different compared to for the purposes of the inheritance tax, because inheritance tax is due on the person's estate.
Right.
CGT is due on what you own.
Right.
Now, I know you would say what I own is only £250,000, but that's not quite the case. When it comes to CGT, because you're comparing these two taxes, which are completely different, for the purpose of CGT is different. So if I have bought this for £10 and I had taken a loan of £4 on it, now this particular property is worth £15. If I were to sell it for 15, the CGT is 15 minus 10, period. It doesn't matter whether I've taken the loan of £4 or £400 for that matter, because the increment this particular property has seen is of £5. I bought it for 10, now is 15. It's a capital gains tax. Any gain, capital-wise, this particular commodity has seen, I would pay on it.
Okay.
Irrespective of the fact that I may be under negative equity, doesn't matter, because surely if I've got negative equity, then I've taken more funds out of it and gone to Bahamas, I have to pay for it.
So,
Then
Eric, just
you have to pay for it.
just clarifying that example.
Before that, so that means inheritance tax takes priority over CGT when it comes to death.
At the time of death, it's only inheritance tax that the person pays, because the estates are not being sold yet.
Mhm. Right.
It's only the value at the date of death, whatever the person had actually owned, takes the priority. So going back to example of 1,750,000 pound debt on it, 250,000 pound is the only equity that has now been passed over to, say, for example, another beneficiary, a son, for that matter. But now, for the purposes of CGT, the value get uplifted at 1 million.
Right.
After 5 years, if this particular beneficiary were to sell it for 1.5 million, he would pay CGT on 1.5 minus 1 million. Because he got this property for 1 million. This property has now seen the increment of 500,000 over the past 5 years, and that's what he would pay on.
Right. Fine.
Can I just add
Deal?
something here, if you don't mind?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, Mitesh.
So I think it'd be good to maybe do another session at some point, because what I've also seen is a lot of my clients, I know exactly where you're coming from. So recently, especially this year, I've been telling my clients post-offer, post-completion, especially with being portfolio landlords, to look at all these aspects in more detail. And I think what it is more about prioritizing what's important in your life. And I think these areas are very, very important.
But they're inevitably very important.
Yeah,
What usually I've seen is and particularly with the portfolio landlords,
Yeah.
they keep on adding the portfolio within the property estate, which is great, obviously is good. But what they're not realizing is the fact that eventually 40% of that will go away. It will go away. You can Google search, there's something called BPR, which is Business Property Relief. That is a specialist inheritance tax relief that is applicable for all the businesses. So if I have a business, as I've told you before, this pen with business, I'm buying and selling pens, and now the stock that I have is worth 10 million.
Yeah.
Been very profitable business. It's a trading business. Now the amount of stock that I have is 10 million.
Yeah.
It can pass over to my beneficiaries free of tax. Free of tax. No inheritance tax, because it's eligible for the BPR, because it's a trading business. However, HMRC does not consider portfolio landlord business as a trading business.
That's right.
Even though you buy and sell the properties. It goes through with some of those minor attention to details, fine point things, which says if it has got bricks and mortar within, then we don't consider this to be a trading business. Somehow HMRC thinks if you're buying and selling property, you are a very timid businessman. You are not risking it much. Let me take more from you.
Arif, how do they, I'm going to come back to this 500, 750 and a million example in a minute. So how does the, and I was having a discussion with someone, how does the HMRC distinguish between a trading business that owns some property and a property business that just does property trading? Is there a way that they distinguish?
Yeah, of course. So there are parameters associated with it. So for example, if I were to have the trading business of these pens and I have got a manufacturing outlet on it, in essence, what do I have? What do I have which comprises of my stock, which comprises of the value of my business? Is it more than a particular percentage, which is part of the bricks and mortar? In pens business, no, surely would not be. And majority of the trading businessmen would have a savvy tax planning around the fact that even the factory or the commercial unit that they're operating from, that would be outside the business that they would have it. So they would have the commercial property owned by a separate entity, a separate SPV, and the trading business would be owned by some other trading, a separate SPV as well. So that tomorrow, God forbid, if someone were to sue on the trading business, it would not affect the property. That's why it is called, and it's very popular within the property sector as well. This structure is called PropCo OpCo. As in, one is the business, one is the company. They're both companies, but one company just holds property. So I've got 2 manufacturing unit, 2 commercial outlet, and I'm buying them. I bought them freehold, but this property just owns this particular property. This company just owns the property, and the other company does the operating part of it. That's why it's called OPCO, operating company. It does buying and selling and so on and so forth. So in this case, obviously it's a pen. Chances of somebody suing me or something goes wrong is very thin. But if I were to do something which is to do with the health and safety, the chances are higher. Even for the legal suit and any other matter for that business affected, my property is safeguarded. And that's why it's OPCO, PropCo. And that particular OPCO, which is operating company, would not be subject to inheritance tax. But if it's a property portfolio business, the entire portfolio would be subject to 40% chunk. And you will be surprised the amount of inheritance tax forms that we have submitted with the huge amount of tax liability. Now, there are ways you can mitigate even after that, but I don't want to give it to you now, otherwise people would not draft a will. But yeah, there are ways you can draft, you can amend, you can mitigate inheritance tax again on the first death. There's something called deed of variation. So say, for example, somebody has drafted the will, and in naivety, they have given half to son and half to spouse, as opposed to giving full to spouse. The son, within 2 years, can file a deed of variation and give everything that the son has to their mom. And then that way, the inheritance tax is mitigated. So these are, again, more complex cases, but it's worth the effort, because the amount at stake we are talking is massive.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Might have to give you an extended program as well.
Can I just add 1 or 2 bits? I know we're
go for it. Yeah.
Nearing there. I don't know sort of dwell into aspects, but what I want to see is leave the viewers and the panel with just areas to think about, because obviously I'm coming from the area where I've seen all this, because obviously I do the lending, so I've seen portfolios and everything. So if you think about the trend that's happened over the last 18 months, we got clients with a portfolio in personal name. They're really lost, not understanding whether they should go down the route of setting up an SPV, limited company, what to do there. That headache probably after 18 months is gone, because they've taken some advice, or they've picked up somebody from YouTube channel explaining something, they've gone for it. And bulk of the clients now would have either a mixture of personal portfolio in a personal name and some in limited company names, or in the process of trying to avoid IHT and transferring that personal property into limited company names. So all sorts of things that are happening in the market right now.
Yeah, but having said that, let me just to interrupt. By you transferring the portfolio into company name, how would you avoid inheritance tax? Because company is owned by you.
I know.
And that's again a common myth that I find it. Oh, don't worry, I've got property in the company. Well,
no. I'm saying there are people that are out there that are trying to do all that. I'm not saying whether they manage to do it, but this is what I'm hearing. I've heard there's ways and means that people are trying to avoid that. But the point I'm trying to make is that over the 18 months that this was the area of focus. Within that, people have forgotten to go to specialists like Arif and the like, where you really need to, after you've seen a broker and have had all those conversations, you really do need to have that conversation around the will, understanding future plans. If you've got a business, are you understanding that there's a separate entity between the business and the personal? So are you understanding the share structures? Are you doing the holding company structures? That's important. Are you understanding the OPCO, PropCo if you've got a trading business as well? There are so many layers and layers of areas that are complex, where when you're doing all this, you need to spend time and sit with an expert like Arif, really, because then the whole trust thing comes in. There's so many layers and layers and layers of areas that you need to be aware of, especially if you're in that area. If you're just a residential homeowner, like Arif said, the value is 650, or the small mortgage, it's a different matter. Mirror will and things like that could mitigate the risk. But all I'm saying is right now we're seeing a lot of portfolio clients in terms of landlords out there. And my just one piece of advice right now, regardless of the fact that I'm not talking about my business, is that you really need to sort of get some consultation on
but surely I don't think there's something that would hinder them, because if you have built up your property portfolio of 10 or 100 properties for that matter, taking the headache shouldn't be a difficult part for you, because you have done the diligence within your business. It's something to protect that particular business for that matter.
No, not me. I'm talking about the fact that they don't take the advice. That's what I'm saying. After they've done the business, the mortgage business, They don't look at wills, they don't look at trust, they don't look at advice, they don't understand IHT, they don't understand any of them, they don't do anything about it. That's what I'm saying. And unfortunately, we don't have that much time to follow up and say, by the way, it's been 6 months if you did all this business. I need you to hold your hand and take you to a specialist and make you sit down for an hour so that you understand all these areas. So unfortunately, what I'm saying is I'm seeing myself, because 80% of our business is portfolio landlords, but I'm seeing that they aren't really clued up on all these aspects, and it doesn't take that long, maybe an hour's meeting, and you're able to figure out your options.
And incorporation is good. I'm not saying it's bad. It's good for anybody who owns more than five or more properties. It's good, but it would only mitigate your current income tax. It would only take a Section 24. Yeah, maybe freeze a share and then to certain extent of inheritance tax, but not completely.
No.
Mitesh, this is why we have this YouTube channel, to start people on the journey.
Sure.
Arif, I've got a couple of more questions. So going back to this scenario.
I thought you finished your bucket list.
No, come on. I haven't started yet. Come on. Look, you know I'm going to bring some. You know I have to ask a better question.
You're making the most of me.
Sorry?
You're making the most of me. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm getting my money's worth out of you, Arif. Don't worry about that.
There's nothing like free advice out there.
Well, look.
No, go on.
We pay for it with attention. The advice is not difficult.
You got to put 50p more on it, but yeah, you can go on.
Srinder's got the 50p's in. Look, we do this to help the community and help everybody out.
Absolutely. So go on, Dil.
Look, the guy's bought a property for 500,000. He's remortgaged it to 750. So there's that 250 that he's bought a Ferrari and gone to the Bahamas. The poor chap, while he's in the Bahamas, gets too excited and kicks the bucket. And at that point, his property is worth 750. $1 million. So from the mortgage is 750, it's worth $1 million. The 250 is the equity. That's the inheritance tax.
That is it. End of story. So if you have 10 million, if you spend all of the money, that's fine.
Yeah.
Inheritance tax will be something that you're left over with at the time of your death. If you don't have anything, that's fine.
So between the 500 and the 750, the one he's bought, the yacht, the holiday, and the, well, I don't know how much that buys actually. Probably doesn't buy you any yacht whatsoever. Anyway,
Ibiza.
So that 250 that would be capital gains. I've heard a phrase saying capital gains dies with you. Is that the case?
No, because capital gains, there has to be a triggering event. So triggering event for inheritance tax is somebody dying.
Okay.
Up until the time the person has not died, within the portfolio, whether he's got 10 million or 100 million, it doesn't matter. Inheritance tax would not trigger. Same goes for the capital gains tax. Triggering event is transfer of the title deed or transfer of the property from one person to another. So from 500 to 750 and from 750 to 1 million, throughout this journey of increment of that particular property, I remain the sole owner of the property. The capital gains tax would not trigger. It would only trigger when I transfer the ownership to somebody else, or if I were to sell it, for that matter.
So in this example, the chap bought it for 750.
And again, sorry to interrupt, Dil, what I have commonly again misunderstood concept and what I have seen so many times is the fact that, I've remortgaged my property from 500 to 750 or 750 to 1 million. I have to pay capital gains tax on it. No, you don't have to. You don't need to, because title deed hasn't transferred yet.
So just to make it absolutely clear, 500 you buy it, you carry on remortgaging and you get up to 750. And then you pop the button. Well, all right. Mr. D, should we say Mr. D, buys it for 500, remortgages it till it gets to 750. Unfortunately, has too much of a good time in the Bahamas and his Ferrari passes away. It is passed on to little D, shall we say, who inherits it at $1 million. So he's going to pay IHT on the difference, i.e. the 250.
Indeed.
Am I right in thinking there's no CGT to be paid there until...
As I've said, is there a triggering event for CGT?
No.
No, that's it. The trigger event is there for CGT after paying inheritance tax. So 1 million was the property. Then eventually that particular property would be transferred to their beneficiaries. But from the time of death of inheritance tax to the time of paying capital gains tax, there is not much difference. So if somebody has died on 1st of January and eventually the property got transferred in March, within 2 months, you won't see the property increment jumping up over moon, unless you have got, a great mansion in South Kensington or Chelsea, which goes on a monthly basis, higher rate. Even then, it's going to be difficult to prove that the property has increased in value. So that's fine. That's okay.
So am I right in thinking we should ask Mitesh to say to his clients, remortgage the hell out of everything, go and spend it as quickly as possible, because you're not going to end up paying capital gains tax when you pop the bucket.
No, you're not going to pay inheritance tax.
It's a balance.
Inheritance tax. So again, you can spend. So obviously, another way of paying no inheritance tax is to spend all. So you can either spend all, or you can give it within your lifetime. The whole point is that you would not have it as part of your estate when you're done. That is it. That is it. So going to Bahama could be a good idea.
Right, that's it. I'm seeing when I can. Actually, no, I haven't got any money yet. I've got to see Mitesh for a while. Right, I've got another question for you, Arif. This is a really good question. You're going to be impressed with this one.
Let me test you this one. Let's see.
He's trying to compete with me.
Absolutely. What does CPFA stand for?
Go again.
What does CPFA stand for?
CPFA, is that my qualification that you
Yeah,
asked?
that's one of your qualifications.
Yeah, I just thought I would just put some numbers, some letters that impress you. So I just put that CPFA out of the blue moon, so that people get impressed. Nobody's going to ask me anyway.
I haven't come across that one before, so that's why I thought I'd ask.
Yes, that's a rare one. So that's the body called Chartered Institute of Public and Finance Accounting. So I'm a member of that as well, but that usually entails or makes someone eligible for doing the accounting within the public sector, such as NHS and so on. So being a member of that particular body entitles you to do the accounting for the public sector, as opposed to, for example, a portfolio landlord is a private sector.
So does that mean you can run number 11?
Well, that's the plan. Let's see how it goes.
Right. Okay. So we've got someone aiming to go into number 10. We've got our candidate for number 11. It's getting quite good in this little.
Akil's got competition now.
Akil's moving from 11 to 10, and Alex can take his place at number 11. Surinder, come on, stay with the plan. Look, have you got any more questions? Oh, enough of.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Arif. It's been
Thank you all.
Arif, thank you very much. Mitesh, thank you very much. We might have to have an extra detailed session with whiteboards. It's been a long time, Arif, so it's good to see you again, my friend. Please come back with a whiteboard, and we might have to get you to do some mental arithmetic and do the figures as live. Surinder, any more questions? Although we haven't got any more time, we've run out of 50.
Yep, 50p's are gone now.
All right, we've run out of 50p's. I'm sorry to everyone. Look, I hope you enjoyed that. It was an interesting session. Mitesh, we're going to get you back on with your whiteboard and your colouring. Sorry, with your markers, not colouring pencils. And same with you, Arif. We're going to do another program on this because this is super interesting. For those that haven't got a will, please go and get one. It doesn't matter where you get it from. Go and get one.
Go and get one.
Yeah. So.
Take one.
And hopefully you don't pop the clogs after you get the will, because it doesn't mean you have to die. I like your idea. You frame it because it incentivizes you to take more action while you're alive. Anyway, enough of the gloom mongering. We will see everybody next Thursday. Thank you for everyone's time. Thank you for our guests for coming on and sharing that.
Thank you again, once again, Arif and Mitesh.
You guys would say bad news. I would say things that need to be shared and discussed. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So it's awesome. Thank you very much.
Great.
We've got a surprise guest next week. Surinder can't tell me, and I don't think he's gonna anyway. We'll see everybody next Thursday at 5 o'clock.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Okay. Bye. Hi. Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
It's just me and you left now.
Well, I think we're still live.
We can shut that off. Just 1 minute.